European ladies on the White House lawn than he was about addressing this Negro problem that we have now. He again did not perform. But again, the Prophet Noble Drew Ali, we can see in the archives, we can see on the photos where he's sitting up there with the Prophet Noble Drew Ali, that it was because of the Prophet that he became a congressman. Islam? Islam?
Islam, we're here.
Okay. So we hope that we address that question for you. I mean, you know, when Oscar the Priest came along, he brought all of those people who were supporting the candidacy of congressmen. He brought all those people who had money, didn't know what to do with it, had great ideas and didn't know where to take it.
Islam? All right, we seem to have dropped the call from the Supreme Grand Sheikh, and he was tying in some very important history of Oscar the Priest and the importance of the work, the political arm of the Moorish Science Temple of America, and some of the key figures in Illinois political history that the Prophet was able to touch, and who, as the Supreme Grand Sheikh has elaborated on, were members, prominent members of the Moorish Science Temple of America, the Prophet's political arm and might. So we're going to try to reconnect with the Supreme Grand Sheikh. Stay tuned. All right, we're coming back live with the Supreme Grand Sheikh of the Moorish Science Temple of America, Brother Emmanuel Braswell Bey, as he continues to explore the political influence of the Moorish Science Temple of America from the 1913 founding of the Moorish Science Temple of America to 1929, and its effects beyond 1929, even till the present day of our President of the United States of America, the 44th President Barack Hussein Obama. Supreme Grand Sheikh Emmanuel Braswell Bey, would you like to continue where you left off?
Yes, I would. You know, it's so much information, and again, I'm saying the same thing, that we're going back and forth, but there's so much area to cover, you know, and how Arthur Fawcett put it, the author of The Asiatic Gods of Metropolis. He says, in his words, from a tiny acorn grew a strong oak tree, known by Noble Drew Ali, the seed known as Noble Drew Ali and his Moorish Science Temple of America. He goes on to say how not only did the Prophet Noble Drew Ali influence the political ambiance in Chicago, but throughout the United States of America, he also influenced many groups who are looking to be recognized politically to this very day, you know, by his program in the Moorish Science Temple of America, Nationality and Divine Creed. Act 6 of our Divine Constitution and Bylaws says what we teach, and it is the Prophet's law. We teach nationality and divine creed. That is what we teach. That has never been taught to our people before. Again, it gave our people self-pride, as it has given us self-pride, and has given us the courage to do wondrous things. As our Prophet said, he would dare our youth to do wondrous things. When we talk about Barack Hussein Obama, his political career began in Chicago and in Illinois. And as a state senator heavily involved in the politics of the state of Illinois, his mentor again was Emil Jones. Emil Jones was from the second the Second Ward, and everybody in the Second Ward, following from Louis B. Anderson, Oscar B. Priest, who was in the Second Ward, Claude B. Holman, William Dawson. All of these people were heavily influenced and also members of the Moorish Science Temple of America under the Prophet Noble Drew Ali. But they had the vision that to teach our people to be better citizens, they had to have some kind of political power. And that political power, again, lies in us proclaiming our nationality as juror persons in a juristic society and becoming politically active as we mobilized our political power as free national men. Emil Jones came from a large family. He later moved to Morgan Park, where he was great friends with the Rice family. One of the Rice later became superintendent of the police department in Chicago, the first Asiatic policeman in Chicago, superintendent of police in Chicago. Aaron Payne Eel's brother, Mr. Payne, later moved to Morgan Park, and he owned the only currency exchange out there in Morgan Park on 111th Street near Bishop. All of these people were heavily involved in the Moorish Science Temple of America, who later moved to Morgan Park, but they were heavily involved in that. Well, Barack didn't know how to get around politically, but Emil Jones, and you hear very little about how he influenced him. He took him under his wings and taught him everything he could possibly know. But we look at this like this, look at a situation like this. Before Kenya, on the other side, before Kenya was called Kenya, it is the land of Ham. And we know that the names interchange. Hamathites, Egyptians, Cushites, Kemetics. We're talking about the same people. But this produced a line of kings, produced a line of magistrates, if you will. And it is in divine order that Barack be the President of the United States of America, because he comes from that lineage of Ham. He comes from that. But his grooming had to be of a Moorish extraction. And that grooming was from Emil Jones, who was heavily influenced with Moorish science and how to maneuver around the politics and be known as outstanding. Even though they would never, they have never, to my knowledge, given credit to the Prophet Noble Drew Ali and his Moorish Science Temple of America, even in his attempts to visit Cuba, as we have read, to visit what is now known as the Organization of American States, to push our political agenda to the highest. He had never been given credit for that, but we know upon research that it is definitely, unequivocally, due to Noble Drew Ali's influence and his Moorish Science Temple of America. They used his ideals, they used his concept, they used everything that the Prophet taught all of us, even to this day, to further their political agenda. Take, for instance, let's go back to William Dawson. We know him as William Dawson Bey. At that time, the Irish and the Italians were mobilizing their political power, and they were very much on it. They were paying people to go door to door, and then they made it so that if you didn't, they threatened you. Well, this concept can go back to Robert Marx. It came from him. He would pay our people $5 a day, which was a lot of money back in the early 20s, if they would go and canvass and do political work in the field. So that concept came from him. Now, in Bridgeport, there was a group of Irish people, Irish Americans, who formed a club called the Hamburg Club. And that Hamburg Club, one of the prominent members of that Hamburg Club was yours truly, Mr. Richard J. Daley, who later became the mayor of the city of Chicago. Well, the Dan Ryan Expressway was not built then. So there was really no dividing line, as it was the railroad. The only was a railroad, the Illinois Central Railroad, which is on Federal Street. That railroad was the only dividing line between Bridgeport and what they call the Braswell area. Well, by that time, many of the prominent buildings that architects came all over the world to build after the Chicago fire, many of the Jews and other European people had vacated that area, and the buildings became slum. Many of our people were living, because there was such a great migration, many of our people were living in houses that had cardboards for a wall. I mean, they didn't have a regular wall. They were only separated by cardboards. And that's all down Indiana, South Parkway, which later became Martin Luther King Drive, and State Street. Well, here's where the deal gets cut. William Dawson Bey goes to Mayor Richard Daley in the Hamburg Club and says, well, listen, because he faced a lot of European opponents and he faced a lot of political letdowns, and he didn't like it. He had a bad taste in his mouth about that. He says, well, this is what we'll do. He says, we'll help you get elected as mayor. And once we do that, we want to remove all of these slum areas and build high-rises, known as State Street Apartments, Robert Taylor Apartments, that later became known as the Jets in the street language, but in the public eye, Chicago Housing Authority became known as the Projects. And Dawson said to him, he says, listen, every apartment that we give to our people, we would guarantee you a vote. So you'll always be in office, no matter what. And this became true. This happened. And, of course, they asked him, what do you want in return, Mr. Dawson Bey, or Mr. Dawson? He said, I want control over all of the jobs in the post office and in the Chicago public schools. And that he did. You had to see him to get a job, knowing that he was already taking kickbacks from the gambling and the policy numbers people. He was making over $1,000 a week, so the report shows, for the information shows. So he used his skills to further, upon that point, to construct and build what is now known as the Democratic machine, a voting machine, guaranteed votes to this day. These people, again, are heavily influenced by the Prophet Noble Ali. Every Asiatic that come out of politics in Chicago were touched by Noble Ali in some way or the other, the Prophet. And this is what we can prove through research, through deep research, and what we intend to talk about even more, the more chances we get on how the Prophet Noble Ali have influenced politics in Chicago, therefore in the world, and heavily influenced the election of our president now, Mr. Barack Hussein Obama. Now, we gave a little history of Chicago as a main port, main industry area. It is similar to Mecca, Mecca being on the coastline. You know, when you have a port city on the coastline, you guarantee commerce. You know, commerce was so good here, but what makes it even better, like we said earlier, is the intricate railroad system that Chicago boasts of. You can go down any street in Chicago and think you're not going over a railroad, and there the railroad tracks is. There it is. It's more intricate than we can probably even imagine. But being a port city, it exuberates commerce. And when there's commerce, our people come. So from the beginning, this city was found by a Moor of Moroccan descent, Jean-Baptiste du Sable Maurice. Maurice meaning Moor. Many people don't like to say the whole title of his name, Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable Maurice. So it was destined to be a place where Moors would meet and further our agenda as free national men supporting the free national constitution.
Islam, Supreme Grand Sheik. I mean, that is a excellent history that we have to get, put down in writing for the Moorish posterity that you have, and that's very beautiful. And what I'd like you to do at this time is talk about somewhat of how the Chicago Defender, how the Prophet and the Chicago Defender seem to partner up, and if you have the possible origin of the Chicago Defender. I know a lot of research that Moorish Americans do. They go to the Chicago Defender when they're looking for the history of the Moorish Science Temple of America. And also, Can you touch on some of the important people that were in the banking industry, like Jesse Binga, and how the Prophet was able to draw these different types of personalities in, and how the Prophet may have received that understanding or brought a large portion of understanding over from Marcus Garvey's movement and how he was attempting to influence the political sphere as well. Can you sort of tie that in? I know I gave you a broad to sweep with, but if you can.
I'll do my best, brother. Robert Abbott and John Sinstech were together with the Chicago Defender newspaper, which was a small newspaper. Now, let's go back to when the influx came, the Great Migration came to Chicago of our people in droves. I mean, it was like refugees escaping. We know that a lot of lynching was going on in the South, particularly Mississippi, and they were escaping not only the lynching, but they were trying to find a better living for their families, So, and we talked about the many clubs that existed then. Well, just as many clubs as there were many organizations set up to receive these people who, some of these people, had nowhere to go. They were promised to stay with their cousins or their aunts or their uncles or their friends, but when they got here, it wasn't like that. So Ida B. Wells, who was an advocate of our rights, but the rights of the so-called Negro in terms of lynching, anti-lynching, and she established a social service agency that would particularly guide these young women to a safer place, and young men also, but particularly young women, and to help them, to give them medical treatment if they needed it, and to try to help them with employment, to help them, period, to get established. Well, during that time, and many women amongst us gathered together to do that as well. Cleveland Hall was one of them. Cleveland Hall was one of them. Also, the one who did the open heart surgery, Daniel Hale Williams, was one of them who were heavily involved in helping our people. Again, they were doing the best that they could do, but they didn't realize how much better they could do if they came into the Moorish Science Temple of America under the teachings of the Prophet Noble Drew Ali. In other words, they were like little camps, portioned off here, there, and everywhere, to the point that they really was not effective as the Moorish Science Temple of America was, and began to really do some things to help our people. But Robert Abbott and John Sinstech, they decided that they would have this newspaper to inform our people of what's going on, where to go, and how to get help, and they were influential during the Great Migration. Well, we know that Julius Rosenwald at one point pumped an enormous amount of money into that newspaper so he could control it, which he did. So a lot of things that the Chicago Defender newspaper wrote that wasn't favorable to the Moorish Science Temple of America, we believe on our research that because it was completely controlled by the powers that be at that time, Julius Rosenwald. And it got so bad at one point that those old Moors wouldn't even buy the Chicago Defender. They refused to buy that newspaper anymore. Okay, so that's what we know about our research about Abbott, Robert Abbott and Sinstack in relation to the Prophet Noble Drew Ali and the Moorish Science Temple of America. But that wasn't the only newspaper who reported the events of the Moorish Science Temple of America. There were more newspapers, but the Defender did the most. So when we talk about that, we have to keep that in mind too. Now, forgive me, brother, I'm an old man and I can't remember the other parts of your question.
Certainly, it was about the Asiatic brother, Jesse Binga. We know that he attended the first convention of the Moorish Science Temple of America, and then also how the work of Marcus Garvey, the forerunner of our prophet, the harbinger, in his work, what part may that have played in how the prophet brought forth the political influence of the Moorish Science Temple of America and his works in Illinois and Cook County.
Jesse Binga, as sad as it is, let's talk about the end of him. He passed as a pauper. He passed working as a janitor in a public school, sweeping floors, after going to prison. Jesse Binga was a visionary in that he saw that in order for us to gain any kind of real influence, we had to be financially independent. The prophet solicited him again. He was one of those who the prophet brought his program to, and he loved it. And the prophet saw that as being our first Moorish American bank. However, when the Depression came in 1930, and a lot of banks failed, Binga Bank was one of them. Well, let's back up a little bit. It's interesting to know that our first assistant Grand Sheik appointed by the Prophet Noble Drew Ali, who later became the second Supreme Grand Sheik, what is his name? His father was an officer in Binga State Bank. Who am I speaking?
Islam?
Yeah, the second Supreme Grand Sheik and Chairman.
William Morris Hill?
Yes, thank you, brother.
Yes.
And you're helping this old man,
Islam.
So he was an officer in Binga State Bank. Well, when the Depression came in 1930, Jesse Binga, they wanted him to call in. They wanted him to call in those mortgages. He had bought so many people homes. Many of those homes is where the Dan Ryan.
Operation Rapper Inquisition, moving through the fakeness, hip-hop matrix vision. Back again, in these bars, this is my prison. Walls of these pages with pen shanks I'm scribbling. No visits, lines on paper, concrete walls. My margin is my showers and my washroom stalls. End of the page is when I make parole. Force me to execute rappers, then throw me in the hole. So much soul, the MC, not confined. The elements of hip-hop today are not combined. Almost seeing the other side, gotta stay focused. Just gotta let that phone ring and don't lose focus. They can't try to hocus pocus, send rapping jokers with handbags, Gucci.